Hello, I'm Jonathan Mast, and welcome to this edition of the Sedgwick Podcast. Today we're talking about Mental Health Awareness Month, and it's a great topic to bring two of our experts in to focus on, and want to welcome Mark Debus, Clinical Manager for Sedgwick, and Rebecca Sherman, Clinical Behavioral Health Specialist for Sedgwick. Thank you both for being with me today.
Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Jonathan.
Happy to be here.
And we certainly know that mental health is not just something that we talk about 1 month or 1 week out of the year. It's something that thankfully has become really a much higher focus. But this month it's great to bring more attention to it. And so we're going to start out with Mark for our first question. And Mark, what challenges did those navigating a workers' compensation claim face in terms of injury recovery and return to work in the current environment?
Well, I think it's important to remember that an injured worker who is navigating a workers' comp claim and, just the process involved with filing a claim and following through with providing documentation for it and all that, it's important to kind of take a step back and realize that that injured worker is also experiencing probably a lot of pain, physical pain, maybe some emotional pain. They're probably pretty upset about what's going on with them. Getting injured is absolutely no fun. And, oftentimes we're dealing with people who are going through one of the toughest parts of their lives. And they're just not going to be, real happy to deal with, going through the steps involved with filing a workers' comp claim. Whether they're recovering from an injury, whether it's a physical injury or even a psychological injury, can be challenging and certainly stressful for them. For many, the thoughts about returning to work are also daunting. There's a lot of fear about re-injury, fear about loss of income, and fear about their own recovery.
Well, that is absolutely spot on. And Rebecca, what are some of the physiosocial barriers that our clients' employees may have to overcome, and what role did behavioral health specialists play in this, helping those injured workers?
Yeah, so we know that, we all deal with psychosocial barriers in our lives. So it's not injured workers, it's everyone. But now on top of that, you're off work. And as Mark said so eloquently, it's very stressful going through just the process of being off of work. And then if you have added things onto your life, what we know about psychosocial barriers are they affect a lot of different things. They can affect compliance. They can affect motivation, ability to communicate. They can affect our mental well-being, our frustration tolerance. So it really can be, psychosocial barriers can be something related to the workplace injury. So it can be something like a loss of income because you're getting paid less than what you were getting paid while you were working full-time, for example. It could have nothing to do with your work comp injury. It could be something else that's going on in your life. It could be the loss of a loved one. It could be a divorce or a relationship issue. It could be problems with your children or their health or childcare. So there's just a lot of different things. As far as behavioral health being on board and addressing some of those psychosocial barriers, a lot of what we do with injured workers is psychoeducation and validation. People need to be heard. They want to be heard, especially in a situation where, they're just out of their element. Nothing in their life is going normal when you're not at work because of an injury. So having that kind of validation, we do a lot of motivational interviewing, which would be asking open-ended questions, kind of getting a sense where they're at, and then providing the support that's needed when it's needed so that we can assist them in managing through their treatment and getting them back to work appropriately.
And following up on that, would you mind sharing an example of the types of cases that Sedgwick's claims teams may see and how we respond accordingly?
Yeah. We see a slew of different things, as you can imagine, Jonathan. I mean, we see everything from, physical injuries that can be minor and take you off work for a couple of days to, more significant injuries that can be a long-term thing, back injuries or concussions or even some more catastrophic injuries like significant amputations or things like that. We also see situations where people have been the victim of violence at work, workplace robberies, and we've been seeing more of that, and you're seeing that in the news. And so those are the kinds of things that we see and that come across claims examiners' desks. At Sedgwick, we have such a robust managed care team, so we have a lot of different components, not just behavioral health. We've got nurse case managers, telephonic and field case managers. We've got return to work specialists. But as far as behavioral health specialists, really focusing in on, how can we help on a file? And we do see a lot of claims that are psych-accepted claims, so the workplace injuries that maybe resulted from a robbery. But we also work on claims where there's not a psych component that is industrial, but that is definitely one of those psychosocial barriers affecting ability to move forward in a claim. So again, we do a lot of psychoeducation, a lot of medical management, communication with psych providers. We do provider vetting and referrals. We do clinical consultation and oversight on a claim, communicating with examiners and other people that are involved on the file. And really, the heart of what we do is really contacting that injured worker and providing that telephonic support. Sometimes it's access to resources. Sometimes it's getting them set up with the correct provider. Sometimes it's just some basic coping skills that we can provide to them that can kind of get them through and get them on the right path.
And we're going to ask one more follow-up question, and Mark, if you want to jump in after this, if you have any thoughts on this series of questions. But Rebecca, what are some effective ways that workers can manage their well-being? And if you had one top self-care tip, what would that be?
Yeah, that's a great question. Managing well-being has become really tricky because I think people are good at knowing what to do a lot of times, at least for the physical stuff. We've always been taught, eat healthy, get good sleep, go to the doctor, drink a lot of water. I think those are things that we hear in the media and that we've been told by our physicians and, that are kind of in the forefront of people's minds. I think the mental health stuff and the behavioral stuff is a little bit different. And I want to remind people, self-care is not I'm doing that once on a Tuesday and now I don't have to think about it anymore. It's a daily practice. So just like, what you would do for diet and exercise and a sleep regimen, you would do for your mental well-being. So some of those things could look like taking regular breaks, engaging your support system, talking about your feelings if you're feeling stressed, setting realistic expectations for yourself, for other people, doing meditation, doing breath work, keeping a gratitude journal, things like that would be great self-care kinds of things that we want to touch base on every day. As for me, I think my favorite right now, and mine change depending on, where I'm at, but I think my favorite right now and kind of got really instilled in me during COVID and the pandemic was just having grace for myself and having grace for other people. I mean, we're all kind of going through our own thing. When we were going through the pandemic, it was like we were all kind of going through that. And it was easier to give permission to, give each other that grace and to also give grace to yourself. And I think my other one is setting boundaries. I always say healthy boundaries are a wonderful thing. And I think it really helps you assist with self-care if you can kind of know your own boundaries, when to set them appropriately. I don't know, Mark, do you have a favorite?
Well, you mentioned the pandemic, and yeah, I'll tell you, one of my favorites that I started doing more actively right around the time that we started in lockdown in 2020 was limiting exposure to social media. Social media, as you probably already know, and it's certainly coming out a lot more in the news, is designed to elevate your emotions. I mean, that's their algorithm. And so it's designed to make you feel something, usually upset. And so I find that if I can put myself on a media break, or at least limit how much exposure I have to social media, it actually does reduce my overall stress. And it's something that I recommend to a lot of the folks that we're working with, especially claimants who are trying to manage a very stressful situation during their recovery. If they're sitting on their smartphones and doom scrolling hours and hours at a time, that's not good for them. And it's not good for overall stress. It's certainly not good for their sleep. And so I suggest to them, and I suggest to even friends and family, that, set a timer for yourself. Set an actual timer for how much time you're going to spend on social media, and stick to it. And you'll notice a great improvement in your overall arousal state, and your ability to sleep better. It works like magic.
Well, and I know, at least on the most mobile devices too, right? You can even set, because there's parental controls, I think you can set your own screen time restrictions if you don't feel like you can. I mean, obviously you can still go in and reset those, but probably another good idea, I would think, Mark, is you can set that too, and maybe that'll be like the rubber band around your wrist. You won't want to get on as much. But those are great tips. And so, Mark, going to you now, while employees typically assume responsibility for caring for their own mental health outside of work, we are seeing the pendulum swinging in recent years and putting more of the responsibility on employers to take care of their people. So speaking to employers, what can they do to help support their employees' well-being?
Well, yeah, it's interesting, Jonathan. I mean, survey results that came out just a few months ago, I think it was Calm that did a survey. The number one source of stress for people is work. It outweighs any other stressor in people's daily lives, including financial stress. Work stress is the number one cause of stress for people. And, we can always, we talk about resilience, we talk about employees developing resilience. A lot of the focus in the media has really been on resilience. And, resilience is one thing, but, we can also look at what role do employers have on piling on stressful situations for employees. And that's something that actually employers do have some control over to some extent, specifically managers and supervisors. And so when I talk to managers and supervisors, one thing I really want to hammer home is this idea of figure out what your employees are feeling. And there isn't an easy way to do that other than to talk to them. I mean, you could do a survey. Surveys are only going to get you a little piece of the information. A lot of companies rely on a lot of surveys to hopefully get a temperature check. And surveys are great, but it doesn't take over from the valuable information that you're going to get from actually talking to your employees. I suggest to managers set up a regular time to have conversations with your employees. I try to do that with my folks once a week, where we're talking just one-on-one. I have the luxury I can do that. Other managers, if you have a large team, that may not be realistic, but try to have some regular contact with them at least every other week. And talk about things that aren't necessarily work-related. Talk about what's going on in their personal lives. Ask them. Share information about yourselves. It's important that we also model good behavior when it comes to setting boundaries for work-life balance. We talk about work-life balance as if it's everybody knows what that means. What you're looking at is trying to keep stress at work and not have it bleed over into your home life as much as possible. And it's really challenging when you're working from home because your office is in your home. And so it's really harder to have a work-life balance if you are a remote worker. It's also harder for a manager to find out what someone's feeling and thinking when they can't actually see them. So there's some challenges there that will take some extra steps on a manager's part to get to that information. One thing I encourage managers to do when I talk about modeling good behavior, and just kind of give an example of what that looks like, be mindful of when you send emails. Don't send them after hours. Or if you do work, after hours, set your email system up to deliver the email during work hours. You can, there's settings you can do to adjust that. Don't send emails after hours because people will often read emails after hours, and then it, upsets their relaxation time or their time with their family. Don't call or text employees after hours at home if you can avoid that. There's some circumstances where some jobs are more emergency-based, and that may not be realistic. But for the most part, if you have something that can wait till the next day, try to wait till the next day. Because the last thing you want to do is create an environment where your employees are going to burn out. And then also just for yourself as a manager, you have a stressful job as well. Make sure you take time to recharge and actually unplug during your off time. Encourage your team to take vacation time or paid time off if they have that benefit, and encourage them to actually stay unplugged from work during that time. And then I would say lastly, Jonathan, as an employer, you need to also look at what kind of benefits you're offering your group. Many employers now have employee assistance program benefits. They may also offer some health and wellness benefits. Make sure you provide that information to your employees and let them know it's available to them, usually free of charge, and often they can access those benefits confidentially. So it's not something that's going to be reported back to your team that you're using those benefits, and make sure that your employees know that that is available to them.
Well, and finally, of course, it's a two-edged sword here. But what role does technology play in the wellness space today? Because there are a lot of options that are really nice and available.
There are a lot of options. Technology, you're right, it is a two-edged sword. On the sharp end of the sword, you've got social media, which can actually be really helpful when you're isolated. And a lot of people did turn to social media during the early days of the pandemic and lockdown. It was their only way of connecting with other people in a lot of instances. But, the sharp edge of that sword is that it can also be detrimental to your mental health if used too much, or used in the wrong way or not monitored. Other things that, when I think of technology, I also think of, one of the biggest advances that we've seen in the psychological field is the delivery of counseling services via telemed, telehealth appointments, virtual visits with a qualified psychologist or counselor. That provides a lot more access for people that may not have the ability to travel to see a provider. We see this a lot even in workers' comp, where people may not be able to travel because of a physical injury, or there might be some other mental health concerns that are keeping them homebound. And so the availability of psychologists and therapists seeing people virtually has really opened up a whole bunch of possibilities for appointments. Another thing to consider is we talked about some apps earlier with monitoring your social media usage, but there's other apps that you can use that can also be very helpful in the wellness space. I'm thinking of apps that we use all the time for mindfulness, meditation. You can even have apps on yoga. Apps will manage how many steps you get in a day, exercise, reminders about nutrition, and other things that can help you overall increase your overall wellness. And I think that can be really useful as well. And a lot of those apps are going to be free. And there's a lot of free options out there that you don't have to spend a lot of money. You don't have to enroll in them. A lot of them are even ad-free. So there's a lot of options there. Rebecca, did you have ideas on some of those apps as well? I know you've used those in the past with claimants.
Yeah, there are a lot of really good apps and a lot of apps that are updated pretty regularly that are associated with like anxiety disorders, research, who are running the applications. I'm thinking of UCLA Mindful as one that I recommend quite a bit. There's a couple other ones that are great for walking you through a panic attack. This is where I'm at right now. And it kind of like takes you through and asks you questions and kind of gives you some feedback about what kind of steps you could take. So yeah, I would agree that there's quite a lot out there in the app world, and it's just finding what works for you. I know when I think about technology, and this is kind of even before all that, and you mentioned kind of, monitoring your steps and your breath, Mark, but, in therapy, we use that too in a biofeedback kind of format where, you're measuring the temperature of your skin, you're measuring your heart rate while you're involved in therapy. So that's been going on for a long time. They do a lot of that in EMDR therapy, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy. Even in cognitive behavioral therapy, they'll do that kind of biofeedback where you're paying attention to your breath or your heart rate or your temperature, which can be really beneficial to kind of have that immediate feedback on this is what my body is doing while my mind is going through this. So it's really fascinating.
Well, I want to thank both Mark and Rebecca for taking time to talk to us today. And certainly I think one of the biggest things, I know, Mark, since you've been doing podcasts on the show, is just that I think we're seeing, if anything else, more and more acceptance of people are dealing with mental health, and it's okay, and whatever that is. So but beyond the scope of our discussion today, we encourage you to reach out to someone if you need assistance. So again, thanks to our experts, and until next time, we'll catch you then.